All right, my friends, welcome back to another episode of the Professional Brotherhood Podcast. I have another great guest on with me today, and I'm happy to welcome Jonathan Brumley to the show. How are you tonight?
I'm doing well. How are
That's
you?
awesome. Great. Thanks for joining me. This was kind of a everybody listens to this. I put these up on Wednesday morning. So, if you're listening to it when it first hits the podcast platforms on a Wednesday, or later on, whenever you happen to be catching this, nobody ever knows kind of the backstory to how these come together.
Mhm.
This one literally came together in like a couple hours.
Yeah.
I was surfing the web today. I came across you. I read a couple articles, listened to some other podcasts, caught some YouTube videos, and I just hit your blog up and said, "Hey, well, maybe let me see if I can get this guy on." And
Yeah.
well,
I'm
here
glad it
we
worked.
are. Here we
I'm
are a
glad it
few
worked.
hours later. It's 9:30 at night, and we're doing some recording. So if you wouldn't mind, if you could introduce yourself to the guests or to to the audience, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, thanks for the invite. I appreciate this very much. And I see so much value in podcasting. I do a lot of, listening myself, and you can learn so much just through the networking that comes from people that you don't necessarily have a conversation with, but you at least get to listen to.
Yeah.
And so it's really cool to be a small role in doing this as well. But for those of you who don't know me, my name is Jonathan Brumley. I am currently in Denver, Colorado. Been here for about 2 years now. Definitely not where my journey started. I've been a firefighter since 2009, started in a volunteer fire department here in Colorado. And I did that for about 2 years, knowing all along I wanted to be a firefighter. That's the only thing that I wanted to do from that point forward. I got bit by that bug immediately upon joining the volunteer fire service. So I got my first career job, and that took me to Nebraska, where I worked for a few years prior to going down to Houston, Texas. So not only did I get bit by the firefighting bug, I got bit by the big city bug as well. And so for some listeners who are in the volunteer, that may not be your journey, but it was definitely mine. So it took me to Houston, Texas, where I got to learn so much and have such a broad knowledge base given to me there. And then now I was able to travel back home to Colorado, where I grew up, and incredibly grateful to be here. And you know what, I met a lot of guys that worked for my current department, doing trainings and various things, and I knew that I wanted to work for Engine 3 before I even worked for the Denver Fire Department, and now I get to say that that's where I'm assigned. So
Wow.
pretty cool how God's kind of taken me on that journey, all the way through the volunteer fire service to a very small career department, to a very large career department,
Mhm.
and now to be at my dream spot.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's great to see in a fairly short window. I mean,
Yeah,
to be
very.
able to see as much of as you've seen, and
Hmm.
uh, and just get so many different aspects of the job. Um,
Absolutely.
let's go back to your volunteer days
Hmm.
for a bit, because I know in talking to lots of guys that I'm friendly with, and other people that we've had on the show. um I mean, the bug always starts there for those
Absolutely. Hmm.
and a lot of times, your earliest mentors are in your formidable days in the fire service. So I'm curious as to what type of department that was,
Hmm.
what your experience was there, before you moved on.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So the department that I worked for, it's a rural town that was just north of the city that I grew up in. The department had about 80 members, combination department, and I couldn't tell you the exact split between paid members versus volunteer members. And honestly, they did an amazing job of keeping it that way.
Hmm.
And so as far as the department goes, they covered about 50 square miles, only ran about 600 calls a year. But the amount of effort that they put into training and loving the job is really what gave me my foundation. And I give all the credit to two officers in particular, that I had in that volunteer fire department for setting me up for who I am today in my career.
Hmm.
They were both members of career departments outside of the volunteer fire department, but they brought that same energy, the same passion and everything to the volunteer fire service as well. So we weren't in a situation where we were responding from home or anything, but we actually pulled shifts at the volunteer fire station.
Okay.
So kind of how they had it set up, we had a minimum requirement of 48 hours per month, that we had to commit to being at the fire station. And you could break that out into 12-hour shifts. You could do it all in one block. It was kind of up to you. And then obviously we had the training nights like so many people do.
Hmm.
Typically it was one night a month you had a fire training, and another night during the month you had some type of EMS training. So it could have just been that, but especially for those two lieutenants, they made it so much more than that, where, a lot of times they were coming off shift at their career department, and they put forth so much effort to making sure that the people who were at this volunteer fire department had the foundations and the skills that we need to do our jobs, whether or not we're being paid for it. So they really set me up and gave me the tools that I needed to do my job now, really.
Hmm.
And seeing their passion was obviously contagious, and that was really what spurred me into wanting to be a firefighter full time.
Yeah, that's awesome. One of the things that we've talked about here before is the importance of mentorship and
Hmm.
setting volunteers up for success.
Right.
There's lots of agencies out there that do a really, really good job of that. And there's others that don't do such a good job. And
Hmm.
in today's day and age, when we have, you know, a nationwide issue with recruitment and retention of volunteers, um, setting people up for success is is it's important. It's
Absolutely.
crucial if you want that agency to flourish and to continue to do good things. And
Hmm.
if you don't have those people that uh, come back or are always there with that passion, as you put it,
Hmm.
it's difficult. It's really, really difficult.
One thing I loved about that department is they made a very conscious effort that if somebody from the outside were to walk into that fire department, they would have no idea who was volunteer and who was career. And it went both ways. As far as the career guys go, it was a situation where they were humble, where they had no desire to look down on any type of volunteer individual. They wanted to pass along the information that they were given. But then it came upon the volunteers to meet the same level of service that the career guys who have the opportunity to train so much more, to go on so many more calls.
Yeah.
It was on that volunteer firefighter to get their skills to the same level as these guys who do it for a living.
Sure.
And so it really worked both ways in that department, where that was the level of expectation, where when somebody walked into that firehouse who didn't know otherwise, nobody could tell who was who. And that was one thing that I really loved about it. And I think that that's how all combination departments should work.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you. I mean, my first 20 years I spent in a combination department, and um, many of those years was the same way. I mean, the only way you could tell who was on shift and was getting paid and who was there that was a volunteer was the guys that were on shift were in a duty uniform, and the guys that were volunteers, we would come into the station when the call went out,
Hmm.
were weren't in a duty uniform, and that's really the only way you could tell.
Yeah,
And yeah, it just makes the working relationship so much better, because
absolutely.
everybody wants to, you know, do the job and do the job for the right reasons. And that's to
Hmm.
provide the service to our community that, our community expects. They don't, we've said this on the platform several times, when the fire apparatus pulls up in front of Mrs. Jones's house, she doesn't care if you're getting a paycheck or not for the job.
Right.
She just expects you to be a professional and be able to do the job and
Yes,
solve her
absolutely.
problem. And because it's probably the worst or one of the worst days in that person's life. So,
Absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
especially, in an area where the area that I live in, which is, pretty rural and pretty much all volunteer, but we have a lot of people from the metro area, from New York City, especially during COVID, that have
Mhm.
escaped the city,
Yeah.
and they're coming up into the mountains to their second homes or whatever, and they really don't know the difference. They see a piece of fire apparatus pull up, and you know bunch of people get off of that fire apparatus, they're thinking, oh, it's the FDNY. They don't know that, it's Brian that just left his job, and this one that just left his job, and the the woman that works at the bank, and they don't have a clue. They
No.
just see a bunch of people get off a fire apparatus. um
Right.
so yeah, that's great to hear, and and I'm sure that played a big part in who you are today.
Absolutely, it is. Definitely, like I said, all credit goes to the foundation that was built by that fire department. They ignited the passion in me. They trained me in an incredible way, well beyond what I would expect. A volunteer who's only there for 48 hours in a single month
Yeah.
would get. eh, like I said, every single time that I was on shift, somebody had something planned, so where guys could very easily, cash it in for the night where they did just get off of their job.
Sure.
Somebody wanted to go out for stores, somebody wanted to stretch lines, somebody wanted to throw ladders, and they would set up drills on Saturdays,
Hmm.
so that you could get more hands-on time because you weren't at the regular job. So
Sure.
absolutely, all credit goes to that fire department for making me who I am.
So I'm just curious, and I know in a situation like that, oftentimes the volunteers of the combination department will eventually cross over to the
Mhm.
career side. Is
Right.
that something that you saw often in that particular department, and did you ever have that opportunity? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so it did happen. I would say on an annual basis,
Okay.
volunteers had the opportunity to test for a firefighter position.
Hmm.
Being that it was a rural department that was combination, there were plenty of bigger cities here in Colorado
Right.
that often tried to, eat up the guys who were into the job, and rightfully so. So it was a bit of a stepping stone department in that regard, because these other departments saw the level of effort that was being put out of that fire department, and the level of
Right.
guys that were volunteers at this department could very easily transition into that full-time role, no problem.
Wow.
And so, yes, I did have that opportunity. And in fact, I tested one time with that fire department. I
Hmm.
got the top of the list, and I was given a job offer by that department in Nebraska in the exact same time period. So I went from knowing that I wanted to be a firefighter to suddenly I had two jobs that I had to decide between.
Right.
And really, what it came down to for me was call volume, and also the desire to get my hands into a few other things. So
Okay.
that's what took me to Nebraska. So I didn't actually end up going over to the career side of my volunteer department. Um, and it was specifically because I knew that I wanted a little bit more experience than I felt like the call volume was going to give me at that other department. So
Gotcha.
I was able to jump over to Nebraska, where that department only had 15 people in it. That included the fire chief, that included the fire marshal. So
Wow.
even though we were a paid department, very much operated similarly to what a volunteer fire department would, just
Right.
a little bit more budget, I would assume.
Right.
But the thing was, is I got trained as a hazmat technician. I was given the opportunity to go do bomb tech training in New Mexico. I got wildland trained, just because we were the only paid department in that entire area. The closest one to us was actually Cheyenne, Wyoming. So it was about an hour away for the next closest
Wow.
paid department. So there was just a lot of unique opportunities that that department provided me compared to the place that I started. So it had nothing necessarily to do with my disdain or anything like that for
Sure.
my
Sure.
volunteer spot, but really just seeking greater opportunity.
And what was the call volume in the Nebraska department?
So around 3,000.
Wow. Okay.
So it did change fairly significantly for me, where when I would go to the volunteer house, I would be lucky to make one, maybe two calls
Hmm.
in the time that I was there in a 24-hour period. So it changed it to about 5 to 7 a day, which I was happy to see.
Wow. That's a big change. And
Yeah.
how long were you there?
I spent 2 years at that fire department, and again, it had nothing to do with, my dislike for the people or being disgruntled with the department. All of my career moves have been in an effort to progress who I am, and an effort to just be a better firefighter. At the end of
Hmm.
the day, I've sought those opportunities so that I didn't remain stagnant, but continued to improve who I was.
Yeah, absolutely.
And thankfully, I have a family willing to support me through all of that as well, because they've gone through the ringer as well as I've made my changes.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, it's not like you're moving from, city to city within a, within a state. I mean, you're making significant moves here,
Very much so, very much so.
and
Three states and pretty significant mileage between them.
yeah, absolutely. All right, so you leave Nebraska and you go down to Houston,
Houston,
and
Texas, yeah.
and how long were you in Houston, Texas for?
I was there just about 6 years. So started there in 2013 and then left in 2019.
And obviously Houston, Texas is the call volume went up even higher than
Very much so.
Nebraska. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So we went from, 3,000 as an entire department in Scottsbluff to my engine was running over 4,000. So polar opposites, department of 15 people in Nebraska to a department of over 4,000 in Houston and 93 stations. So yeah, polar opposites in terms of experience there.
Right, right. Oh, and not to backtrack too much, but um as you were making these progressions on, as far as how the systems worked now,
Hmm.
in, when you started off in your volunteer house, and then when you moved to Nebraska, were you pretty much cross trained on everything, or were you on an engine or on a truck or on a
No,
rescue? How did
no.
that?
So actually, it wasn't until I moved back here to Denver that I ever was in a specific seat.
Okay.
So up until that point, everybody kind of did everything. So in the volunteer house, it really just depended on the staffing for the day,
Sure.
whether I was on an engine, whether I moved over to a truck or a rescue type unit.
Hmm.
And then when I moved to Nebraska, we ran two apparatus with the 5 people that we had on duty on a particular day. So actually, everything that we ran out of the house was pretty much on a 105-foot Pierce Quint. And
Okay.
then the medical calls were done by two guys, basically on a Ford F-350 with a box on the back of it. It was non-transport, but you basically you got to be jack of all trades in
Sure.
those types of situations, both in the volunteer and in the small career departments, because nobody else is coming.
Right.
So you got to do a little bit of everything. And then even moving down to Houston, they're very different from most large municipal departments in that you got assigned to a station, you didn't get assigned to an apparatus. So the station that I was at last, we had an engine, a truck, an ambulance, and then a chief. And so that gave us 5 firefighter spots with a staffing of 4 people.
Hmm.
So on any given day, I would basically spend 2 days on an engine, 2 days on a truck, and 1 day on the ambulance. So basically got to see a very broad view of the fire ground in that regard. So now that I'm back in Denver, like I said, I'm assigned specifically to an engine, and that's the first time that I've had to just sit in a seat and
Wow.
not do a lot of moving around. So I it's very interesting. I see both sides of it and the value in being able to see so many different perspectives on the fire ground, but then I also see so much value in just really getting to hone your craft in a particular discipline.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, it's definitely, made you a very versatile firefighter because
I would hope
you've,
so.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Because
Yeah.
you've been in so many different positions, and, well, definitely not a short period of time at this point,
Mhm.
but yeah, that's interesting. I really I love hearing, how the different cities and different areas operate. Coming from New York, obviously everybody immediately thinks of the FDNY, and
Mhm.
a lot of people know how they operate, engines and trucks and rescues and squads, and seat assignments, and you go into some of the smaller cities around the state, and obviously that changes. But it's cool to hear how some of the other big cities operate and how they
Yeah,
operate
yeah.
differently,
I
um,
think there's a mentor of mine and somebody that I've listened to several times, and his name is Michael Torres. He's out of Chicago Fire Department.
okay,
And one thing that I love about his attitude is he's like, I don't care if I'm a good truck guy. I want to be a good fireman.
sure,
And I really, I see so much value in that, and I try to take the same philosophy that, what, if somebody calls me to move over to the truck, I'm absolutely there. I'm all in, and they can trust me to do whatever on that
sure,
particular day. So yeah, I would much rather be known as a good fireman than a good
yeah,
engine fireman.
yeah. But now where you are today, though, and working on an engine, it gives you the full perspective of the fire scene, everything that you've done up
Absolutely.
until now. So you can appreciate what the guys that are on the truck are going through.
Hmm.
You can appreciate all those other aspects of the job,
No
which
doubt.
which
You
is
can
valuable.
anticipate what they're going to do. You can
Yeah.
work in conjunction with them. The whole concept of coordinated fire attack just becomes so much more clear
Hmm.
when you know as an engine firefighter, hey, maybe I need to delay just a second so the truck can get their search in before I drop this thermal column and cool off the smoke. All of those things work in conjunction, and knowing what the guy opposite of you is going through, it's so valuable.
Yeah. 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 All right. So now completed the what I can we say completed? You're not
I have
you're
no
settled.
desire to move again, so
Okay, all
hopefully
right,
we're done.
all right. I mean, I would imagine being a Colorado guy that
Yeah,
Denver might have been the goal. It
it
might have been
was.
the
It was.
okay,
It was the goal day one as a
okay,
volunteer, and you saw all the people around you, kind of fighting for that same spot in Denver. And to be completely honest with you, as a volunteer with a year of experience, I was super intimidated to go and test with the big city. I
mhm,
thought, what, there's guys with 10, 15 years going to these tests. What do I have to offer that they don't? And I didn't take that opportunity back in the day to, pursue that.
right,
And whether or not I would have gotten that position, who knows? But I was blessed to get the position my first go at testing with the city here. But up until that, it was a scary, proposition to try to move into that realm for me. And whether or not that was a valid fear, we won't know.
yeah,
But yeah, I felt like, finally having worked in Houston and getting my feet under me a little bit in a bigger city, I'm like, yeah, now it's definitely the time to try to make this move.
and I think I heard you say that where you are now, engine three,
Hmm.
is where you wanted to be.
That was the dream, man. That
Okay,
was the dream.
okay, and so how long have you been in Denver now?
So 2 years
2
now,
years. Okay.
roughly. So
Okay.
my 2 years just hit at the beginning of January.
So, and I think the other thing that is important to just kind of talk about that I don't know if people will realize or not, that every time you made one of these steps, you're a probie again, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, listen, I think that takes a special kind of person right there. Not everybody, there's not a lot of people that would be willing to continuously start over and be a probie again.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I absolutely have been the perennial probie.
Yeah.
I haven't mentioned all the fire departments because I actually worked part-time at several other fire departments in Texas as well. So
Oh,
I have
okay.
now worked for 6 fire departments, and that's by no means the career path that I suggest to everybody, but that's what, worked for me. And
Right.
it made me such a well-rounded individual, I feel, in terms of, seeing that broad perspective and being able to take something from each of those realms. But the thing about being a probationary is it forces the people around you to want to be around you, want to train,
Hmm.
have to train in some regards. Even if they don't want to, they have to, because you're the probie and there's certain expectations of
Right.
you and your performance. And that's what I love doing anyways. So, you can't hurt me with training. Let's do it all day, every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what I want to do at the firehouse. And these were things that I would be doing anyways, doing
Right.
doing chores, learning, pulling out the books, pulling out the maps, training. Like I do that anyway. So
Right.
what's a title in it?
I love it, you know,
Yeah.
and I know lots of other people that would too. But I know lots of people in the fire service that, you know, your perspective is, you know, would not line up with theirs. You know, going back to being a probie would be like, you know, probably the worst thing ever. And look, I think your perspective is phenomenal. I love it. I love, you know, regardless of where you are in your fire service journey, you
Mhm.
know, consistently learning, consistently looking to learn new things, to gain new knowledge, to, you know, to network with people, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
But you know, we know there's people out there that if you said, hey, you know, you can go do this job, but you got to be a probie for a year again, and they'd be like, no, no, I'm good where I'm at.
It's
You
it's
know,
a thought that comes into the mind for sure, but
yeah,
it's so often the benefits outweigh the, you know,
yeah, for sure,
the downgrade, if you
yeah,
want to call it,
yeah, yeah,
to
absolutely,
probationary. And I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I enjoy the extra 15 minutes after lunch to sit back in the chair and relax. So don't
right,
get me wrong in that.
sure, sure,
But there is a certain level of individual that, you know, is willing to start over again. And
right.
I've found that, you know, it's really not that bad.
That's great. It's really great. All right, so let's dive into hose for a little bit. Okay,
Okay.
so um, your specialty, I guess. Your we were talking about it earlier. I said you like to geek out on hose, which I have a real respect for because I'm not that guy, you know. But I appreciate guys that, like you said when we were talking prior, you need somebody that's willing to, you know, be the go-to
Absolutely.
on all these different individual things.
Yeah.
So you speak quite a bit on the 2.5 inch line, and
I do.
I know that, you know, in the volunteer service, and I'm sure in certain aspects of the career service as well, this is definitely an underutilized line,
hmm
because, well, we're just kind of, it's beaten into us, right? Inch and three quarter, inch and three quarter, inch and three quarter. Don't go for the 2.5 until you need big water, you know, that,
hmm
and we're all probably very proficient at the inch and three quarter. But because we don't train with it as much, we don't pull it as much, we don't use it as much when it comes to the 2.5, well, you know, you might not be so proficient because you're just not using it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so let's talk about that. First of all, how did you start going down this road?
Okay, so it was a journey that started for me based on realizing how weak I was in the area of the 2.5. And what I found was is that I was way behind where I should have been. And it all went back to some of my first experiences in fire academy, you know, where the 2.5 was kind of preached as you know, only pull this line if it's a defensive fire, or
Sure.
the particular drills that we were put through in that were basically a form of punishment during academy, where, you know, it's over pumped, where it's got this high pressure fog nozzle on it, where the sole goal was just to punish you and to show you how hard it was to flow the line. And
Yeah.
so that was my experience early on. And you you have very little knowledge base at that point in your career to even question it. And so going back to that volunteer fire department that I worked for, we had fog nozzles on it, our rigs. I couldn't tell you what kind of hose we had. And it was just kind of left at that, where that was enough knowledge for the time, was to say, this is a hose, this is a fog nozzle, go. And recognizing that I was so far behind where I wanted to be. And it really started with just watching videos on YouTube
Mhm.
where guys had skills that I didn't, and I was jealous of it. And I wanted to figure out where I was lacking and if it was just like some magic trick that was happening before me on the
Sure.
computer screen. And so I really dove into, you know, what are the nuts and bolts of what makes these videos work, and is it just some trick? And what I found out is that by no means was it a trick, that there were very intentional things that were done in attack packages to make people more successful. And so what happened for me for the 2.5 is I started traveling and doing a lot of classes,
Mhm.
learning from people that I was seeing on the internet, learning from people that I was seeing in the trade magazines, Fire Engineering, Firehouse magazine,
Sure.
really diving into the education side of things because I didn't feel like I was getting that necessarily at my firehouse. And through that traveling, my eyes were really open to, what the nozzle that we put on the end of our line really matters, the type of hose line, the size of hose line. All of these things really play big roles in how they work together as a complete package. And as I was given that information, I started compiling that, and that resulted in me creating my own class just solely out of, I've got all this information. I want to be able to recall this information.
Right.
And I realized, hey, I kind of have something here that I would like to share with others because so much had been graciously given to me. And that's really what started the journey for me. And
Wow.
you see when you dive into all of this that there are some very minute intricacies that equal, big things on the backside on the fire ground. And so I have kind of begun my journey of assisting others in helping sort through all of that because there are
Sure.
so many options.
Oh yeah, there's tremendous amount of options out there,
Hmm.
and it's funny how you relate the story back to the academy because you
Yeah.
know as an instructor, I may or may not a time or two have when things are going bad and
Yep.
guys aren't doing what they're supposed to do with the 1 3/4, you're like, all right, let's really make them work now.
Exactly. Exactly.
Let's
I
get the two and
experienced
a
that
half
in my
out.
last academy.
Yeah,
So it hasn't changed.
yeah.
And me being an instructor now as well, doing a little bit of traveling, I recognize how important it is to set people up for success right from the very beginning.
Sure, absolutely.
That no matter, how much fun it would be to put 6 people on a line, over pump a 2.5 and try to blow all 6 people off, that there is no value in that when it
Right.
comes to actually trying to get people to perform a skill successfully
Yep.
and getting people excited about, doing the job.
Right.
That should always be the goal. Be
Right, because they're
excited and do the job right.
right, because they're never going to want to touch that 2.5 again if you
Absolutely not.
use it as punishment. And you're right, that's generally what
Hmm.
happens. And I know, I know that we don't spend enough time on it. I know in my own department we don't spend
Hmm.
enough time on it because, again, like you said, it's working it into your tactics, I think,
Hmm.
and explaining, okay, this this isn't just the line for the defensive operation. It's not just the line for the commercial strip mall fire. That there
Hmm.
are more applications, but we need to train, we need to practice, and we need to become more comfortable at utilizing this piece of equipment. It's no different than any other piece of equipment that we have.
Certainly.
Right,
Certainly.
right.
Right. If my only application for a rotary saw is to cut the chain off of a padlock off of a chain link fence, then I
Yeah,
am missing the big picture. And it's the very same thing with, a 2.5 line. It's the same thing with an 1 3/4 line. We've got to know the full spectrum of the capabilities of our tools. And so I have no problem geeking out on
yeah.
that stuff because it has helped me tremendously through this whole process. And I mean, you can't tell on this video right now, but I'm a tiny guy. So to me, I have to dive into the technique. I have to dive into what can I do to be better at this job? Is there tangible things that I can take away from,
Sure.
dialing in my attack package to make life easier, not only for me, but for everybody else. And in making life easier, are we more effective and efficient on the fire ground on the back end? And
Yeah.
the answer is almost always yes.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about dialing in the attack package. I know you
Mhm.
could go on this for quite a while, but let's talk about the dialing in because I
Mhm.
think that's one of the things, and it's I like to say that it's in the presentation, right?
It
So
is.
we have to, regardless of where you are in the fire service, lots of times you have to, present these changes because we are, we are filled with tradition, and
Hmm.
tradition can be a tough thing to change, right?
Right,
so
absolutely.
so explaining to somebody why, instead of spending, and again, I'm just throwing rough numbers out here, they're far from accurate, but instead of spending, $200 on a length of hose, we need to spend $400 on a length of hose.
Uh-huh.
What the, what you're actually doing there, like how it all plays into this attack package. So uh
Right, right. So what we got to start with is realizing that it is an entire package. So if
yes.
we try to just piecemeal things and say, you know what, this hose looks pretty or this hose is cheap, and assuming that that's going to be effective isn't necessarily the case. It's understanding how the hose is going to operate with the particular nozzle that we've chosen,
Mhm.
understanding that the nozzle and the gallons per minute that we expect to get out of it is going to affect our ability to hold on to the line and keep the line open, how we're going to be able to move through a structure while that line is open, if we're going to even be able to move. All of these things work together, and so we really have to see that as an entire group. And that's where everything has to start, is we have to understand that yes, we have an end goal, but there's many pieces along the way that have to be incorporated in that. And it's not just as simple as, you know what, this $400 piece of hose is really expensive, it's got to be good for everything that we're going to do,
Right,
because
right,
that's
right.
not the case at all. I could go out and spend $400 on a piece of hose and still have a crap attack package as a
Hmm.
whole, because it's not operating as a system. Now, is it likely that the $400 hose is going to do better than the 150? Likely.
Yeah.
But it takes so much more than that to do this. um, so yeah, it takes somebody with a knowledge of what is our end goal, and it all starts with choosing a target flow.
Hmm.
So we got to decide ultimately how many gallons per minute do we want to come out of the end of our line. And a lot of people here, they get hung up on the whole argument of smooth bore versus fog nozzle,
Right.
because there are specific gallonages that each of them, are set to based on their orifice size. And I don't get into the nuts and bolts of that. What I get into the nuts and bolts of, and really concerned about, is a high pressure attack system versus a low pressure attack system.
Okay.
And I will argue all day that you want to be on the side of the low pressure attack system. And so, a lot of times that is a smooth bore nozzle, because they're set to operate at 50 psi, where for so many years now, the American Fire Service has been sold that, these high pressure 100 psi fog nozzles were where it was at. And there's a lot of repercussions to that. And specifically, our ability to hold the line open and be able to move through a structure
Hmm.
quickly with a nozzle that's fighting back on us so hard is often a losing battle. So no, I don't get necessarily hung up on smooth bore versus fog, but I do get hung up on high pressure versus low pressure. And so there's repercussions to that with our hoses then, because if we're trying to get our hoses to operate at a lower pressure, they don't have the same back pressure holding it open, trying to
Hmm.
keep kinks out of it, keeping the line from getting floppy on us. Those are all things that we got to avoid as well. So it's making sure that then, once we've chosen a target flow, once we've chosen the particular low pressure system, that our hose can function then as well within that system that we've decided we want as well. And more manufacturers are recognizing that, what, we need to provide a gamut of hose options, hoses that are set for high pressures and hoses that'll work great at low pressures. And so I think we've kind of seen a resurgence, especially from the hose manufacturers, recognizing that the fire service as a whole is moving towards this lower pressure attack system,
Right.
specifically because it is so much easier on the firefighter. And we're not having to worry about things like kinks and floppy hose lines and stuff now, because we have the good materials that these manufacturers are now providing us.
Sure, sure. And I think some of the people that'll be listening to this are, trying to come up with scenarios in their mind right now, of
Hmm.
the high pressure versus the low pressure. And
Hmm.
I know the one scenario that I can throw out there right away is, I've been to departments for training where they decided they're going from, an adjustable nozzle to smooth bore, and they break out these, these brand new, whatever, 15/16 or 7/8, 7/8 nozzles, and they throw them on there, and they're like, oh, we can pump less we can pump less pressure
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
And what's the first thing that happens? Their guys are moving the building across, and they're trying to work the nozzle like they've always done, and the nozzle is, kicking their ass because
Right.
it's the pressure's not there, it's flipping back, it's just not operating. And what they typically do, and I've seen this, is they get frustrated with it, and it's because they didn't put work into the package, correct?
Right. Yeah. The nozzle
Yeah.
goes to the trash can because it's the nozzle's fault, because that's the only thing that changed.
Right,
But the
exactly.
reality is they didn't take it as an entire system. And
Right.
when you're purchasing hose and nozzles and even apparatus, you have to think of this as an entire system. How is, A going to affect B, going to affect C? And when you don't put in the time and the effort to see how they're going to work interrelated, you're going to have situations where, regardless of the value of the nozzle, regardless of the value of the hose that you just spent your money on, it's not going to work correctly if you don't take the time to see it as an entire package.
And where, obviously, you could come and you could take a class, you could seek out education, you could take a
Yeah.
class, you
Yeah.
could, you could go to a conference. But in your experience, are any of the manufacturers out there getting better at assisting agencies with creating a package?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So a manufacturer salesman, he's there to sell you product.
Right.
We all
Absolutely.
know that.
Yeah.
They're not going to hide it from you. However, you as a fire department, you have to understand that that's what they're there for. So take their information for what it is. But what we're seeing now is manufacturers are very willing to come out. They'll give you their entire array of nozzles. They'll give you all of the flow meters that you need, all of the pitot gauges, all of the inline gauges that will make this test period work for you. And yeah, you can call up a nozzle manufacturer, you can call up a hose manufacturer, and there's somebody in your region now who is willing to come out to your fire department and help you sort through this. Yes, they absolutely want you to purchase their product at the end of the day.
Sure.
But you as a fire department, you have the ability to say, hey, guess what? You know what? We're going to try out a couple of nozzles today. We would love to see your product, but also we're gonna throw in a couple more just to see how yours works against the others. So they understand that that's going to be going on, and it's up to the fire department to make sure that they're seeing all of their different options. And like I said, there's so many different options out there that you can get bogged down in it. I would limit it to 4 or 5 different hoses.
Sure.
Maybe 2 or 3 from a particular manufacturer, because it could take you 2 years to do a hose and nozzle test if you wanted it to, and that's absolutely not beneficial to anybody. But yeah, the manufacturers, they're sending their product to conferences all around the country. At this point, they're sending their guys to specific fire departments to do these hose and nozzle tests. All you have to ask.
Yeah. And you know what I find interesting about this is, look, we'll spend years specking out a piece of fire apparatus, years specking it, a year or so building it, and we'll spend tons of time buying auto extrication equipment, specialty tools, saws, all this stuff, but when it comes to the most bread and butter piece of equipment that we're using all the
Right.
time, how many departments are actually spending that much time doing this?
Right.
They're not.
You are not a fire department if you don't have fire hose.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So
Yeah.
you can't get away from it, and there needs to be time and effort spent in this. And this isn't my sales pitch that everybody in the fire department has to be gung-ho about this stuff. Yeah, I totally recognize that. Not everybody in the fire department is going to geek out over hose and nozzles, but we need a couple of individuals who are willing to put in that time and effort.
Sure.
And you know what? Those individuals can do the hose stuff. Somebody else can geek out over the ladders and the ventilation saws and the PPV fans, and
Right.
somebody else takes on ropes and confined space stuff. As long as one person is putting in the time and effort to really dial in this stuff, then everybody wins.
Right.
But yeah, we need a select few individuals who are willing to dive into this stuff.
You know, I know just from, just from getting around in the volunteer fire service, that when it comes to hose and nozzles and, pump operations, it's such a traditional thing, and when you go
Hmm.
to an apparatus operator and you start talking, how many lengths of hose do you have out, what kind of nozzles are you
Hmm.
using, and what are you setting your pump at. It's like, it's like rapid fire on the answers. And if you ask, well, why? Generally, the answer is, well, because this is the way we've always done it.
Right,
Right.
right,
And that way could be like generations old,
right.
you know?
Yeah, the conversation is almost like you just slapped his wife in the face,
Yeah.
even by asking the question. But unfortunately, for that dialed engineer who has been in the fire service for 30 years, his pump chart may have said 60 psi per 100
Right.
when he came into the fire service. So that's what's always in his mind. And if he's not taking the opportunities that he has to realize that, a modern 1 3/4 is probably more in the realm of 25 to 30 psi,
Hmm.
he's giving you double the pressure, and he's going to call you a Sally, set
Right.
down your purse and hold on to the end of this line, when the reality is there's no need for him to be pumping at 220 psi or whatever
Right. Right.
that number ends out being, when you should be pumping at 150. But if that's the way he learned it to begin with, and that's the way he's been doing it for decades, yeah, it's going to be a hard sell to get him to do anything different.
Yeah.
And I ran into that a lot down in Houston. Very traditional in the way that they fight fire, and they use a high pressure attack system down there, where I quite honestly, I was getting crushed on the end of the nozzle, both based on what was being pumped to the line and based on the fact that we were trying to get high flows with high pressures.
Hmm.
And it took 2.5 years with an engine company and an officer that really trusted me, before we made the switch in our nozzle and attack package on my particular engine. And that wasn't even, district wide. It wasn't even station wide. We were the only shift at our station that was willing to move over to a smoothbore attack package.
Wow.
And it took me 2.5 years of conversation to do that. And it takes tact, and it takes playing the long game, because for me, especially having just come over there and starting the conversation, it
Hmm.
would have done me no good to say, you guys have been doing it wrong for all this period of time. We suck. We got to do something different.
Oh,
um,
you'd get
that
nowhere. Yeah.
that conversation gets absolutely nowhere.
Yeah.
And it took, getting all out on the drill ground, showing him the options, showing him the benefits of changing our attack system, and just really wearing him down, quite honestly, before my captain was willing to make that change. And truly, what it took for him was taking him through a class with the nozzle forward cadre.
Hmm.
And it took 2 days of just solid drills of just stretch after stretch, flowing down hallway after hallway after hallway, and just nonstop, before he realized, okay, I see now why you've been telling me this, and why, this is the right move. And it does sometimes. You got to play the long game.
Sure. Sure. Well, and look, at the end of the day, you mentioned it before, you're getting your ass kicked on that
Hmm.
nozzle, trying to move that nozzle through a structure,
Hmm.
and do your job. And if you can be doing the same job and not beating yourself up, and have
Right,
and
right.
have more mobility, it's a win-win, right?
Yeah. The numbers didn't lie on that particular attack package. So even though it was an 1 3/4 line flowing 200 gallons per minute, we were working harder with that line than if we had pulled a 2.5 line with an 1 1/8 tip flowing 265 gallons per minute. So just simply because of the nozzle that we had on the end of that line and the pressure that we were trying to put in it, we were
Mhm.
actually working harder pulling that line than we would have pulling a 2.5. So uh, don't don't just assume because it's an 1.75 inches or because it's a fog, that things are working the way they need to be.
Sure, sure,
Yeah.
sure. So let's talk specifically about the 2.5 for a little while. And I'm
Uh-huh.
not going to ask you to go into your whole class, but
Yeah.
somebody might listen to this and they might be getting out to a conference somewhere and see your name and be like, hey, I remember the podcast and I want to jump in and learn
Uh-huh.
more about this. So let's talk about the 2.5 a little bit, and specifically, you know, why we shouldn't be thinking about it as, just a defensive line or just a commercial fire line, as I've
Hmm.
heard it referred to before.
So I mean, you're from the New York area, and I give full credit to FDNY on this, coming up with the adults acronym. And the adults acronym basically breaks down a good portion of when we should be pulling the 2.5 line. And they basically give an array of scenarios, and only one of them, the D in the acronym, is defensive fire. So we've got these 6 other letters. We've got advanced fire on arrival, defensive operations. The U is uncompartmentalized spaces, or unknown fire location, excuse me. And
Okay.
then the L is large uncompartmentalized spaces. And the T is just situations where we need tons of water. And then finally, the S is standpipe operation. So that just kind of gives us an overview of all of the different situations that we could use it. I add to that the length of our stretch. Also, we should be incorporating some larger lines as well, because we just can't go infinite number of lengths with 1.75 inches. But like I said, the D is the only part of that acronym where it's specifically defensive fires. All of these other opportunities for the 2.5 exist. And I try to bring some awareness to that when I teach that. Look, you as a firefighter have the ability to affect the fire ground in so many positive ways. And really, working for a larger fire department on some of these bigger incidents helped me realize that 1, 2 dialed companies can really change the course of a fire.
Sure.
That you may have 7 or 8 companies on scene, but it's really 2 people or 2 companies that are just doing solid work, that are making the difference on those fires in a lot of cases. And now that's not always the case, but a couple of individuals who are dialed in
Hmm.
can really make some significant impacts. And I show a lot of videos in my class, just showing the effectiveness of the 2.5 inch line, where really you can take what appears to be a multi-alarm fire or a defensive fire and really change it in a matter of 30 to 45 seconds of flowing a bigger line. And just kind of opening people's eyes to the fact that even though it feels like it's going to be a little bit more work on the front end, the amount of just fire destroying ability of the 2.5 is incredible. So any time or any effort that we spend on the front end will pay dividends on the back end for us, and
Sure.
really be a game changer for us on the fire ground. And many times that's done in an offensive role for us. The other thing that I do a lot in my class, and this goes back to just my really broad experience in the fire service, is showing that it's not going to take 6 people to move this line around on the fire ground. And it's not going to take, 5 people stacked up on the nozzle to hold this thing. And I kind of dive into some of the techniques, and I do it even more so in the hands-on setting, just because it's difficult to do in the classroom. But
Hmm.
I especially love in the hands-on setting, showing how, 2 guys can get this line in play, flow tons of water, and make this a maneuverable option for you. Is that ideal? Absolutely not. We'd love to put as many companies as we possibly can on the line. We'll be significantly better if we do, but we don't have to wait for an entire cavalry to be lined up before we can pull and use this line. So I show multiple videos where we have a single firefighter on the nozzle, just destroying fire by himself in the initial stages of some of these fires. And a lot of times the other argument that I hear is, what about water supply? We got to worry about the amount of water coming out of the end of our nozzle too, right?
Right.
And the fact of the matter is in many situations, we're not just flowing for minutes and minutes on end without ever shutting down. There are definitely incidents where that does occur, But I mean, just think about your last house fire. How long did it take you to flow water on the fire and for you to see significant changes?
Sure.
You know, for many of us in the residential setting, that was done in 10 and 15 seconds,
Hmm.
you know, very, very rapidly. And so I talk a little bit about that. You know, what does this big line equate to in a matter of seconds as opposed to a matter of minutes, and, you know, an incident as a whole? Yeah, we might be on scene for an hour, but how much flowing did we actually do? 2-3 minutes tops
Right. Right.
sometimes, you know. So we can be very effective when we place our water where it needs to be. And a lot of times we're able to overwhelm the fire when we choose the big line right off of the get-go. So in my particular department, we use 500-gallon tanks, but in, you know, the rural and volunteer settings, you might have 750,000,
Yeah.
1,500-gallon tanks. You know, that's 10-15 minutes of flow in some cases when you pull that 2.5. So we shouldn't be as afraid of this line as, you know, that first experience where the instructor didn't quite know the technique behind it.
Sure.
Really changed our perspective, and a lot of what my class does is help change that perspective for individuals, so that we get the fear mongering taken care of so that we can
Yeah.
actually be effective on the fire ground.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. And again, it all comes down to the training. You know,
Absolutely.
if you're not training with the 2.5, and the only time it comes off of the apparatus is in that defensive application, that's the only time that you're going to be comfortable with that piece of
Hmm.
equipment, with that line. And you know, there's some great resources out there for options and training. You know, if you can't get to a conference, you mentioned it earlier, you know, getting on YouTube and watching all the different techniques that are
Hmm.
out there. I watched a couple of yours today. You know, I was watching
Yeah.
you pulling a line by yourself and doing the figure eight method, right?
Hmm.
With the 2.5. You know, I
Yeah.
mean, these are things that you can do on a drill night, and you know, you watch the video and then you go out and try and figure it out and see if it works for you.
Right. These were things that I did by myself. You
Right.
know, it doesn't even take, you know, anything formal to do it. I spent, you know, hundreds of hours next to my fire station down in Houston because we had a hydrant right next to the station. And, you know, there's always those times where guys don't want to get out and train.
Hmm.
And okay, no big deal. I took 2 lengths of 2.5 over to that fire hydrant, and that was all I needed. I didn't even need a fire engine. And that's one of the cool things about 2.5 as well is, you know, it operates in low pressures.
Hmm.
So I don't need all of this fancy equipment. I don't need an engine. I can get so much valuable training with very little effort in regards to, you know, this grand scheme of, you know, training. So
Right.
yeah, in the volunteer setting all day long, you don't even need more than yourself to get this done. And
Right.
also what I love about the 2.5 as well is that it translates back down to the 1 3/4.
Sure.
So all of the work that I put in on that 2.5 and dialing in my technique and moving the line around and flowing large amounts of water is just going to make things so much easier for me when it does come time for me to pull the 1 3/4. And at the end of the day, we're going to pull 1 3/4, you know, 8 times out of 10, 9 times out of 10. Okay. But, you know, I may be afraid for that one time where I need to pull 2.5. But if
Mhm.
I'm dialed in and comfortable with the 2.5, all of my fire grounds are going to go so much smoother because I've taken the time to dial in the technique with the more difficult option.
Mhm. And I'm sure you've seen all kinds of, as you get out and teach and talk to people. I'm sure you've seen all kinds of crazy stuff with
Yeah.
the hose packages and nozzles. You know,
Yeah.
I'm just thinking here as you're talking. You know, and I know I've gone to places where, you know, they'll have a brand new piece of fire apparatus, and you know, the 1 3/4 is, you know, packed perfectly with brand new nozzles on it, and you'll go to the 2.5 on the back of the rig, and it's got like a 1970s, you know, chrome smooth bore with the, you know, with the two, you know, and you're like,
Yeah.
"Yeah,
Yeah.
obviously you guys don't use this very much, huh?"
Absolutely,
You know?
absolutely. It's the same 15-year-old hose from the last rig and the
Right,
same
right,
30-year-old nozzle.
right. It's only there because they were told it has to be, you know?
Right,
Um,
right.
yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, you see all kinds of things when you travel, and especially as I travel, you hear the little tips and tricks that people have picked up along the way, and they'll say, "Oh, have you ever, tried a piece of webbing? You got to have a piece of webbing when you're doing 2.5, or you got to have this special bow ring tool, or whatever it might be that they
Right.
found made their 2.5 easier for their particular fire
Mhm.
ground." And sometimes there's a time for that, but when you've taken the time to get out and get quality instruction, and you realize that you don't need fancy stuff at the end of the day. You just need a little bit of technique, and 1 2 guys can really be effective with that line, and do some effort. And I mean, you mentioned it real quick, like there's nothing that tells me more that they haven't studied an attack package than looking at a big play pipe on the back of it with an
Yeah.
ISO stack that's 3 feet long. Those things aren't required to flow a 2.5, and in fact a lot of times they're going to be a hindrance to
Yeah.
you. So get out, explore the information that's out there,
Yeah.
because
Absolutely.
it's available. It's absolutely available.
Oh, listen, and that's the one thing today. I mean, if you want to learn something, it's out there. It's
Hmm.
available, and listen, not everything that you find on YouTube or on the internet is the gospel or 100% accurate, but
No, by
there's
no
a
means.
but there's a lot of great stuff out there. You just have to,
Mhm.
my suggestion is research the person that's presenting it,
Mhm.
and you can very quickly determine whether or not they're credible or not.
Right,
But
right,
there's
absolutely.
a lot of great resources out there that one of the things that I loaded on my phone recently just because I heard somebody talking about it and I hadn't played with it yet was Elkhart's app. I mean,
Hmm.
for this stuff is phenomenal. And it's
Yeah,
just
it takes all the guesswork out of it. It
yeah.
does the math for you, for those of you who don't like to geek out.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. This is great. So I gotta ask you one question, and I ask every guest this one question, and it just kind of goes back to our original goal for the platform, which is promoting professionalism in the volunteer fire service.
Hmm.
And as somebody who started there and has had an incredible journey. In your opinion, what defines a professional volunteer firefighter?
So I obviously I didn't have time to prepare for this or
Oh,
anything, but
I
I
know
think
that's the idea.
there's a
That's
lot
the
of
idea.
things. There's a lot of things that go into that, and I mentioned it right at the very beginning. The mindset is a huge thing. That when I walk into that fire station, regardless of my title, regardless of my paycheck, that people shouldn't know that I'm a volunteer. That I don't do this for a living. That I don't that I don't eat and breathe the fire service. That you know I may need to change tires or change oil to pay the bills, but at the end of the day I love what I do, and I'm going to do everything that I can to be good at what I do. And so from the time that I walk into the fire station, I'm checking out my air pack, I'm making sure that the rig is ready to go, so that those times that I am there and I am engaged in the firefight, that everybody around me looks at that guy and I might as well be FDNY because they think I am.
Sure.
And that's what I think a professional volunteer is somebody who has put forth the time and the effort to just look like everybody else on that fire ground in terms of their skills and abilities, the way they treat people on EMS runs, that they care about individuals, they have the empathy that it needs, to just be a good human. And
Yeah.
that it doesn't matter what tattoos they have, doesn't matter what sticker they've got on the back of their truck, that they're there to be that professional problem solver that you mentioned early on as
Yeah.
well. That what I am here to make a difference, and I have put forth the effort to do all the legwork up until this point to make that difference when you asked me to.
That's awesome, Jonathan. I appreciate it, man. I knew you'd have a good answer. That's why I didn't prep you with the question. I never prep anybody with the question because then they're going to be thinking about it all afternoon. Okay, what kind of an answer am I going to give to that? But that was great. I really appreciate the fact that you and I were able to connect and
Yeah.
connect
Thanks for
so
staying up late
quickly.
with me.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, I appreciate it. I was happy to do it. Where can the listeners find you? I know you're out there,
Mhm.
hopefully in 2021 you'll be out there teaching your class.
Yeah.
Unlike 2020, I'm sure, you know.
Yeah, 2021 is shaping up to be significantly different than 2020 did, as far as teaching is concerned. Easiest way to get a hold of me, I'm on Facebook. So find me there, hit me up on Messenger. I'll give you my phone number as well. It's 970-405-8963. Send me a text, because especially if I'm seeing all kinds of just random phone numbers, I probably won't answer. I'll be honest. I screen phone numbers sometimes.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
But yeah, I'll get back to you as soon as I recognize that it's you. Other places I am getting out and teaching. Upcoming, I'll be in Kentucky. A good place to look is Fire Nuggets for that. I will be in California. Also in April, that's also in Kentucky is in April.
Mhm.
I will be at FDIC in August. I will be at Lake of the Ozarks, the Revolutionary Fire Tactics at the lake, in July. Trying to think of where else. Washington, in that one will be in October.
All
We'll
right.
be in Illinois in November. So yeah, the hands-on is where we learn this stuff. So I
Sure.
can sit and I can talk to you until I'm blue in the face. You'll be tired of listening to me, but the hands-on is where we get to dial all this stuff in, and that's what I really enjoy doing. And that's what the local fire conference is giving us the opportunity to do. So if I haven't mentioned it already, get out to your fire conferences. And I know that that's difficult as a volunteer, but commit to spending $500, driving a couple of hours, and spending 2 weekends out of your entire year, one in the fall, one in the spring. And I guarantee you your abilities to serve the people that you do will increase exponentially. It will
Yeah.
set the tone for the months following at the firehouse. It'll set the tone for the drill nights that you set up. From that point forward, get out to your local fire conference. You don't always have to spend $5,000 to travel to FDIC to get this training. It's available, it's everywhere. A lot of it's online now.
Hmm.
I can't tell you, every single night there's a webinar.
Sure.
That's Get out, spend a couple of your hard-earned dollars that I know that you work hard for, but it will pay dividends on the back end.
Yeah. Listen, not to mention, I just had this conversation with somebody last night. It's good to get out of your bubble. It's
Yeah,
comfortable. It's comfortable. It's
absolutely.
comfortable to be in your bubble. It's comfortable to, know how conversations are going to go and how people are going to react,
Hmm.
but it's good to get out of your bubble. It's good to get out of your department, out of your county, out of your state sometimes, and
Yeah.
just go and be around other like-minded people and learn new things and have new conversations.
Hmm.
And like you said, it pays in dividends, and it helps in your overall growth as a firefighter.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. If I didn't get out of my bubble, I probably still wouldn't be able to tell you what hose is on the back of my rig, or,
Yeah.
what nozzle I'm using. Who cares? That all came from getting out of my bubble and trying to get better.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jonathan, thank you very much for spending some time with me this evening.
Yeah.
Really,
Thank you
really
for the invite.
appreciate it. And I'll get all your links out there, and we'll get everybody your info. So if they want to look you up and hopefully get to one of those conferences, they can. But I really appreciate your time, and stay safe, stay healthy. All right, brother.
All right. Thank you.